Good morning. I'm fine. How are you? Oh, my kids are getting ready.
Silencing all. I'm already that one. I don't need to be that one in another area. Count the days down.
You can't control it, so I had word about it. Good morning.
Morning. Start singing to them, though. Taser. Hey, folks.
Just a minute, we'll ask Dean, if you would, to word our opening prayer. But before we do, who all do we need to remember in our prayers this morning?
Tracy texted me this morning. Miss Mildred got moved to DMH during the night. Her oxygen level down.
Okay, so Miss Mildred is at DMH. Okay. And her oxygen levels are down, so let's remember her. Okay, let's remember Steve. There's about 3 or 4 things circulating. COVID is pretty rampant at the jail. There's a lot of inmates at the jail, and the staff at the jail have all given each other COVID out there. So if they've got it, it's in the community. Who else?
My mom is home. She's doing some better. I guess at this point, we just need to pray that she follows doctor's instructions. When she fails to do that regularly, and then that puts her back in the hospital. But for now, she's doing it.
Just remember, well, why are you laughing?
You don't follow.
You don't follow instructions. Yes.
Lincoln Swan is back at ACB, back in the roles room. She's doing pretty good.
Okay.
She's not back to where she was, but the expectation is she probably will get there. Cognition is good.
Well, that's good.
No worry factors.
That's a blessing. That's great. John Henry, are you just adjusting? Do you wear glasses? I can't tell from here. Okay, are you just adjusting glasses? Or are you raising your hand? Lois?
I have a neighbor, John and Karen Shilson. She had a stroke, is in a wheelchair. He has stage 4 COPD. He's in ICU at Tallahassee Memorial. They have no relatives around. Their grandson's in California. They've lived there 3 years. They met one neighbor. So the prayers would really help.
Yes. Who's taking care of her?
Hmm?
Who is taking care of her?
She's managing right now by herself. She can get to the microwave. So that helps. They're talking to hospice about coming in, but I don't know that he'll be able to come home. I think he'll have to go to a home. And then she's going to have to decide what she's going to do. She's a whole house, whole house full of furniture and a big dog. It's difficult.
Anybody else?
Miss Margie's traveling to see her son. She said she'll be gone for a couple of days.
Okay. Anybody got any praises to share?
Well, I woke up this morning.
Yeah. We're here. We got lung in our air in our lungs.
Either way works.
Yeah.
As long as the two connect.
Dean?
That's great. Very excited about it. So thankful that you started that. We come together. Fellow brother, sister, Jerry, study for, the church, other, thank you for the love, you're ready to go. Thank you for love. Other than that, you would be with those missionaries, one that were sick, government, and they'll take us once a month, pray for cancer that you cured them, go back to them, with them. Father, we ask you to forgive our sins, go into the studies, and start playing good. We will each have us here, Father, we once again thank you for Jesus Christ. That's what we got there. Praise them. With that, we go ahead and study, Father, and
Amen. So we are in Exodus 16 this morning. How long had the children of Israel been out of Egypt up to this point? Okay. So how many days is that? Could be 45 days if it was the 15th day of the second month. Possible. So the children of Israel, we've got this pattern. It started really at the end of 15, where they were complaining about things. What did they complain about at the end of 15?
Better water.
Okay. And now they're complaining again. And in verse 3, they said, we ate bread till our bellies were full in Egypt. Do we believe that?
Bread and meat.
What's that?
They had the meat and the bread.
Yeah, well, they had pots of meat and they ate bread till their bellies were full. Maybe, maybe not, right? Maybe there's some hyperbole in here. They were slaves. So, maybe not. Who do the Jews complain to? And when they're complaining to him, are they directing his complaints to him as if he's the actor in all of this?
They blamed him.
Who are they really complaining about? Look at verses 7 and 8. Billy, can you read 7 and 8 for us?
In the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, for he hears your complaints against the Lord. But what are we that you complain against us? Also Moses said, this shall be seen when the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening, and in the morning bread to the full. For the Lord hears your complaints which you make against him. And what are we? Your complaints are not against us, but against the Lord.
So they're facing Moses and they're blaming Moses. But Moses and God know the truth, don't they? And Moses, to a certain extent, feels the heat, and he'll complain to God about the complaints coming his way. But the scripture tells us, who are they really complaining to or about? God. So we've got this pattern that goes on here where they're faced with a situation, they'll grumble and they'll complain, and then God will make provision for them. And I think what we'll see is this is all anticipated and planned. And it's planned with the idea of teaching the children of Israel. Look at Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 2 through 5. Kevin, can I get you to read that when you get there?
And you shall remember that the Lord your God led you all the way these 40 years in the wilderness to humble you and test you, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. So he humbled you, allowed you to hunger, and fed you with manna which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you know that man shall not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that proceeds from the mouth of the Lord. Your garments did not wear out on you, nor did your foot swell these 40 years. You should know in your heart that as a man chastens his son, so the Lord your God chastens you.
Notice the pattern that's repeated here. Humble, test, and then some reference to learning. In verse 2 there, you shall remember. What are they remembering? They're remembering a lesson. Drop down to verse, let's see if I can find my verse number in here. That man shall not live by bread alone, but how? The word, a reference to learning. Verse 5, you should what? Know. One commentator used a phrase, and he even admits it wasn't of his origin. But it really struck a chord with me. And what he called it was anticipatory provision. Think back to chapter 3. Moses is having this dialogue with God, or they're having this dialogue together. And Moses Where is Moses when this conversation begins? Exodus chapter 3. Where's Moses? He's at Sinai, right? And if you had to pick one complaint by Moses that jumps out at you, as he usually, through his different complaints, what's his chief complaint? He's not capable. So what does God do to address that?
Provision.
How did he make the provision? He gives him Aaron. And so then in chapter 4 and verse 14, he tells him Aaron's on the way. Dan, will you read chapter 4, verse 14?
Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, "What about your brother Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well. He's already on his way to meet you, and he will be glad to see you."
Already on his way. All right. Where was Aaron? He's 435 miles away. Aaron's already on his way. Did God perhaps anticipate that Moses was going to make this complaint? Okay. And he made provision. So they get tomorrow. All right. How is it that they come tomorrow?
They want to go into the West, you have to face war right off the bat.
All right. So they didn't want to take the short route and go straight up north. They go east. Well, what kind of terrain are they in? It's a desert. Desert wilderness. Water is scarce. You think God knew that?
Yeah.
So they get to Mara and there's water there. What's the problem with the water?
Bad water. I want to know what kind of stick it was, so I can use
Yeah.
my bad.
They couldn't drink it. Do you think he knew that?
Yeah.
So what did they do to fix the problem? Say it. What made the water drinkable?
Moses doing what the Lord commanded him to do. That's it. Miracle.
Okay, but what was the miracle? Threw a stick from a tree in it, right? Or did he throw the whole tree? Piece of the tree. All right. If God knew he was going to send them that way, and he knew that the water was going to be bitter, when did God make the tree grow?
Amen.
That's what I'm talking about with anticipatory provision. God knew these things, and God already set up things to be able to take care of the problems that he knew they were going to face. And he tells us in Deuteronomy that these things were done to test them and to teach them. Let's go back to verse 3 of Deuteronomy chapter 8. Just hold your place there, hold your thought there for a moment. So the people are grumbling that they don't have anything to eat. And what does God give them? What does God call it? He calls it bread, right? There. It's the people that call it manna. What does manna mean?
What is it?
What is it? Yeah. So he gives them this bread. He calls it bread. They refer to it by saying, well, what is this? What is it? So in Deuteronomy chapter 8 and verse 3, what did he say about this? Man shall not live by what alone? But man liveth by every word that proceeds from the mouth of the Lord. Does somebody quote this passage later? Christ does. When does he do this? Say it, Marsha, I couldn't hear you.
Satan's tempting him.
And where is he when Satan's tempting him? In the wilderness. So he's out there for 40 days. He's in the wilderness. He's hungry. God tempts him. Jesus quotes this verse. How often could they eat the manna in the wilderness, the Israelites?
Every day, except Sunday.
They could eat it on Sunday, right?
Every day.
Okay, so let's say it's Sunday, and I haven't collected any more manna, but I have manna to eat. If I have any left over, can I eat it Monday? All right, so I gather on Monday. And I gather more than I can eat. Can I eat it on Tuesday? But if I gather on Saturday, can I gather enough for Saturday and Sunday? Or I'm sorry, you're right. No, you're right. No. So Friday, right? Friday I can gather enough for Friday and Saturday. It's our daily bread, right? They're gathering bread every day. Do we say a prayer? And we don't tend to say it here. We're a little unique in that fashion. A lot of churches say the Lord's Prayer in the worship service. Is there a provision in the Lord's Prayer that makes reference to our daily bread? Give us this day our daily bread. Why was the bread necessary for the Israelites? Easy question. So if they didn't eat, they were going to die, right? If they didn't have something to eat, they were going to die. Let's take it aside. How many Israelites are there? Okay. So think about it how you want to. Whether it's 600 families or 600,000 fighting men, either way, you're either talking about 2,400 people or 2.4 million people. I don't care which number you choose. Imagine it's your family of 4 and you're in the wilderness. Is it going to be hard to feed and water your small family? I think it's going to be a challenge. You're going to have to be working, and you're going to have to be knowledgeable. Yes.
After 45 days, how did they sustain themselves?
That's a good question. They took some unleavened bread with them. They also have livestock, but what are the livestock eating? What's the livestock drinking? I don't know. But now, forget about a family of 4 and imagine 600 families. Does it get more difficult? Imagine it's what the scripture says it's 2.4 million people. Is it harder to feed and water all of those people? Here's why I bring this up. I don't care what number you choose. This wasn't done by natural phenomena. You know, there are things where people have said, well, you know, if you go out there at a certain time of the year, there's this stuff, this secretion that it's kind of like a bread kind of thing, and people can eat it. Okay, great. One guy might be able to survive on that for a while. But you're not going to make enough for 600 families to sustain on for 40 years. You're not going to make enough for 2.4 million people to sustain themselves for 40 years. This isn't natural. So the Exodus is like the Gospels. It's either crazy or it's true. Jesus is either a liar, or he's mental, or he's the Son of God. There's no in between. And it's the same thing here with the Exodus. You might be able to show how the Nile turns red every now and then. But you can't make it dark for 3 days. And you can't feed a large number of people in the desert with anything other than the providence of God. So it's either true or it's not. There's no in between. All right, so God said the purpose of this was for their instruction. And Jesus says, he quotes this passage when Satan is tempting him. What was Jesus's point? John Henry?
Well, it should be our point. Quit worrying about all that, because if we live before the Lord, obeying his word, we're all right.
Okay. So part of what God's doing here is God's teaching them some early commands, and he's teaching them faith. You needed water, I provided water. You needed to be able to be drinkable, I provided that. You needed bread, I provided you bread. You needed meat, I gave you meat. I made sure your clothes did not wear out. We skip ahead to chapter 17, they're going to fight the Amalekites. Do we really believe that a slave army with, I don't know what kind of weapons they had or what kind of weapons they could fashion in the wilderness? Because I don't read in the passage that Pharaoh's army gave them provisions when they were leaving Egypt. Do we really believe that the Israelites and Joshua defeated the Amalekites? Or perhaps God did that for them as well. So he's teaching them faith. He's teaching them that they're going to have to learn to obey. It's tough medicine. You're going to have to go out and gather that food and trust it's going to be there. If you gather too much, it's going to spoil. If you don't gather, you're going to be hungry. And then on the Sabbath, he's teaching them to rest. So they're learning two simple commands and faith before they get to, whether it's before Sinai or not, people disagree about that. I kind of accept it the way it's written. It's a couple of commands early before they start getting more commands. He's teaching them how to obey, and he's teaching them to trust that God will take care of them. So, Kevin.
I would just, nothing new, but cumulatively, that teaches them to have a dependence upon God for every need that they have.
Okay.
Amen.
So now skip ahead again to Matthew 4. What is Jesus's point?
That it all comes from God.
Okay.
And he's doing centuries later, he's just reinforcing what God's teaching them. Yes.
And so what he's telling them is to rely on the Word of God, right? All right, so in John 1:1, what's the Word? Jesus is the Word. So later in John chapter 6, Jesus has already fed people a couple of times. And they come to him, and what do they ask of him? What do they say?
Get some more bread.
Said Moses gave us manna to eat. What did Jesus say about that? He said, I'm the bread. I'm the bread. I'm the bread of life. So I want to bring it back down around to the Lord's Prayer. Give us this day our daily bread. What are we saying there? Are we just asking for a meal?
Take care of us, God.
I think there might be a lot going on there, and I'm willing to stretch it a pretty good ways. At the easiest, most simplistic message is I trust you, God, to give me what I need. And I wouldn't bind it beyond that, but I'll tell you, I think there's something more there. Give me your word and your instruction every day. Give me a little bit of Jesus every day. Because he's the bread. That's what I need in my life every day. Now, what do you think about the Lord's Prayer? I try to say it every day. Now, I'll be honest with you. If I was as eloquent as Joe, who I love to hear his prayers, I could probably say a different prayer every day. But I'm not that good. So I try to remember certain prayers. But again, even with the Lord's Prayer, is it good to just say it without thinking or dwelling or meditating on the words of the prayer? Or when we say it to ourselves, should we consider the ramifications? And I won't go through all the parts, but just what is it that we mean by give us today our daily bread? Lord, give me that 20-piece McNuggets at McDonald's today.
Amen.
I mean,
Real song.
yeah. Or are we considering the fact that what we're saying is God, take care of me, and I trust that you will. Okay? Yes.
It's like Jesus made the connection from the Deuteronomy passage to when he was being tempted.
Exactly.
And then later saying that I'm the bread. In Deuteronomy, when it says, shall not live by bread alone, but every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. The connection is those words are Jesus' words, because he is Lord.
Yes.
He's God. So he's making that connection of his words being from God.
No, I agree. And I think he's trying to get us to make that connection when you take it all the way to John 6. So it's, you got the Exodus, then you have Matthew 4, then you have John 6. Let me ask you this. How much bread did they gather each day?
For everybody.
All right.
How much is a home?
It's between 3.8 and 6.5 bushels. I'm going to say something. I just want you to know I'm quoting Zondervan's Bible Encyclopedia. This isn't Bill Blue freelancing. What does an omer literally mean?
NIV, chronological Bible, it says 2 quarts.
2 quarts? Okay. According to Zondervan's, it literally means an ass load. That's a lot of manna per person. Per person. And those are their words, you know. So,
You just lost everybody.
but it's,
That's a bigger load for some than others.
I think it's per person. The way I read it was per person, an omer per person. Now, think about it. Say it was 2 quarts, and you've got just 600 families, 2,400 people. 2 quarts times that, how much is it? That's 4,800 quarts. That's 1,200 gallons. Say it was 3.8 bushels, because they said it really varied between 3.8 and 6.5. Let's just take the small number. 3.8 bushels times 2,400 people. How many bushels of bread is that? 9,120 bushels a day. If it's 2.4 million people, it's 9,120,000 bushels a day. Is that natural phenomenon?
Several semi-loads.
That's a lot of food. That is providence. It's more than a donkey load, that's for sure.
That'd be enough for all day.
Yeah, that's a lot of food. All right, so notice that when the children of Israel are in Egypt, they are a people. Pharaoh calls them a people. And then later, as they exit Egypt, they are referred to as a nation. They are a community of people, and they have been saved. But after they've been saved, there are problems. They murmur and complain with their leadership, and they have some problems with feeding their community. Does anyone see a parallel here somewhere else? What about Pentecost? Christians become a community. Go ahead, Kevin.
I said, when the deacons were appointed to serve Greek
Yes.
women.
Acts chapter 6. There's an allusion, a remembrance, a parallel. I don't know the right word. But in Acts chapter 2, Christians become a community. They too are delivered by the grace of God. And then in Acts chapter 6, there's some grumbling, some disputes, because some people aren't getting fed. All I'm suggesting to you is that the Bible, through various different ways, through the Gospels and through Acts, through Revelation chapter 2, he who overcomes, I'll give him the hidden manna. There are references back to themes that we read in the book of Exodus. All right, so how many purposes were there for feeding the people here the way that God did? There's a practical one, right? People had to eat. There's an eternal one, because the way he did it confirmed that God is the God of creation, whether it was the water or the bread or the quail. He made it happen. And therefore, it was to glorify God. But then there's a third reason, and we discussed it. It's spiritual. To teach the Israelites to trust and have faith and reliance upon God, that he would take care of them. It's interesting to me how many times that when God is, for lack of a better word, because I'm not articulate enough to express it the right way, that when God is defending himself, he refers back to creation to demonstrate who he is, whether through his power or through his exposition. He goes back to creation. Any comments about this before we roll into the Sabbath? Yes.
One of the things that we need to remember daily is we're supposed to pray daily. And that's showing ourselves and God, we depend on you for everything. And you are the ruler, and nothing happens without you knowing.
I would add to this, and I agree with you 1,010%. But as Oscar has often encouraged us to do, and he's encouraged us to pray daily also, but to spend time in the Word. I am constantly amazed at how stupid I am, and how it's brought out in returning to passages that I have read many times, particularly in Genesis and Matthew, ones that we all tend to read many times. And I've read them over and over since before I was a member of the church, since I was a member of the church, and even in the last year. I see things or hear things in the text that I never picked up on before.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
It's how you read it, whether you read it with the foreknowledge of what it's gonna say, or you read it with an open mind of what it really says. I had no problem with that because of being brought up in the church, just already know what it's gonna say, so you just kind of skim over it. But when you open your heart and read it, as though you've never read it before, you often see things you never saw.
I agree. But one thing I would encourage you to do is read it different ways. And what I mean is read it or listen to it, but don't. And it took me a long time to do it this way, because when I would read before, I'd want to read every word and study every word before I'd read on to the next word. And I have found that I've gotten more out of it by trying to take it in like a fire hydrant and not dwelling on any one word and taking it in expositionally, like listening to it. And then you hear things you didn't, I have to hear now because I can't read as well. I hear things in context that I wouldn't pick up if I'm focused on this word and then that word, or this sentence and then that sentence. If I just take it all in, I'm finding things I didn't find before. We'll pick up with the Sabbath on Wednesday, Lord willing.
I'm telling you, well, just show you, that don't matter how deep you go, there's always more. Always more. Now. Will they really?
Did that trample over you?
Huh? Oh, some and not, and I think you better have a time to, because they were on it. She said, she goes,
Moving like your sores.
oh, working with your father.
He's killing you. He's 80%.
That's what I'm saying. I go home every day and I say, Alicia, he is not human. That man is
When
not
I was
human.
in college, I was that phenomenal chef. I worked out 2